So this is a follow-up to a video I made a few months ago where I declared that I was emulating the remaster of Yakuza 1 and 2, and today, as of writing the first line of the script, I finally finished both of them. At least the main campaigns, more on that later. It was really cool because I felt like I finally experienced these stories the way they were originally intended to with the PS2 graphics. You know how when you play Kiwami 2 immediately after the first one, and you see this completely different engine? Meanwhile, when you play the original Yakuza 2 after 1, they feel and look the same, which almost makes it feel like a more authentic sequel. Now, as a result of emulating these games to the very end, I ended up figuring out things that I previously wasn't aware of, and that's why this video exists. Now, one thing I always knew, even though I didn't want to believe, was the fact that remasters don't upscale every cutscene. What I mean by this is when you emulate a game, most of the time the emulator has a feature that allows you to upscale the resolution to something higher than its native graphic quality on the original console. Now, when I first emulated Yakuza 1 on PCSX2, I knew there were going to be some cutscenes that wouldn't be upscaled, and that's because emulators can typically only upscale in-game visuals. Meanwhile, pre-rendered cutscenes have no change. This doesn't just apply to the resolution, even stuff like frame rate and widescreen patches don't work on pre-rendered cutscenes, which is actually one of the reasons why I was curious to see if this limitation would persist on the remasters. My thought process was maybe they were able to recover the original assets for the creation of those cutscenes and may have been able to render them at a higher resolution. But that wasn't the case. The pre-rendered scenes have that RAW-less PS2 picture quality even on the official remasters. And to be honest, I kind of knew that would be the case because I've played other remasters where the same issue happened, and I'm not really begrudging Sega or RGG Studio for not being able to bump up those scenes, although this basically means that if you emulate the PS2 versions, then you're really not getting that much of a different experience graphically, especially because these games are locked to 30 frames, and even on RPCS3, there's no wizardry I could pull off to be able to play these games at higher frame rates. There is a feature that kind of makes you do that, but all it will do is speed up the game because it's just not really designed to run at 60 or higher. So basically what I'm saying is that if you're pondering on whether to buy the original PS2 or the PS3 remasters, honestly, aside from faster loadings, I don't think you're getting that much of an improved experience with the remasters unless you're playing these games natively on their respective consoles. To which at that point, yeah, obviously buy the PS3 version. I mean, come on, 720p and loading the game off of the HDD. But then there's the second problem of the remasters never being localized. So in the end, maybe you really should just buy the PS2 versions, unless you're a freak like me who wanted to play them in Japanese, even if it meant skipping the side missions, because there's no way in fuck I'm going to read Japanese text and try to translate all of the dialogue boxes. In fact, if you want me to be honest, if you really do intend on buying copies of the original games, I think it makes much more sense for them to be the PS2 copies, not just in terms of its language, but also just their usability in the long run. Both the PS3 and 4, when jailbroken, can play PS2 games with some workarounds. The PS5, if it ever gets jailbroken, will probably also play PS2 games using the same PlayStation Classics tricks from the PlayStation 4, and your computer is most likely to recognize PS2 games without any trouble compared to PS3, and that's because PS3 games have stronger disk encryption that your computer may not even be able to read them. So even speaking from a preservationist viewpoint, I think the original PS2 copies make more sense. Now, one thing I mentioned in my previous video is that in general, I was having a perfectly playable experience, which is still true even after finishing them. Not that RPCS3 consumes a ton of RAM to begin with, but I was impressed by how little memory it was taking away from my computer. On average, it was consuming like maybe 1 or 1.5 gigs, and CPU usage generally didn't even surpass 10% on my Ryzen 7 5700G, which is great, and for how demanding RPCS3 can be on system requirements, this is one game I can honestly recommend even if you have a middle-of-the-range gaming computer, because it's very soft. However, I should mention that I did experience some bugs. A minor one was that the dialogue box text kept glitching out, subtitles being out of sync during pre-rendered cutscenes, but the worst one, specifically in the first game, this didn't really happen in Yakuza 2. If I tried to hop on the cab, the game would crash and I would have to reboot the emulator. I don't really know what exactly was causing this bug, but it happens. So if you're emulating Yakuza 1 on RPCS3, you may or may not need to avoid riding a taxi. Although don't worry, this doesn't affect the progress of the game. Other than that, I don't think I experienced any other major bugs. There is of course the title screen crash, but at least in my experience, this only happened with the Linux build of RPCS 3 and it's pretty easy to bypass this. You just have to boot the games up through the self files. Aside from these problems, the games are perfectly playable. Now, I guess this means that I will have to update my tier list even though I didn't really want to, but whatever. As a matter of fact, a lot has changed since then, and I'm going to refrain from going into too much details about my updated stances because I'm planning on binge playing the whole game series again, and once I do that, I'll be able to properly share my thoughts on my updated opinions. But here's what I can say regarding the lower tiers. I had to rework some things in order to adjust the new entries by adding S+. Essentially, Dead Souls will stay at the very bottom, my opinions haven't really changed. Yakuza 1 will be placed at D tier because for its time, it was a very exciting game, having modern day Tokyo recreated in video game form with fantastic atmosphere, gratuitous action, and an addicting story with a lot of unpredictable moments. However, I'm not ranking this any higher than this because this game can be very difficult to revisit because it's pretty clunky. The first few hours I had with this game was legitimately frustrating because of how unresponsive it felt at times, so much so that I decided to buy a new controller because I did notice that the one I owned had a bit of input lag, so I was willing to spend 60 euros just to improve my experience, but even after this upgrade the game still felt clunky. It also has a bit of a camera problem, so this game has fixed angles, which, you know, whatever. It's a little bit annoying because the game will often have disorienting angle shifts, but even in scenes where you can rotate the camera, like during battles, the camera can act a little bit wonky. If you're able to get past these issues, I do think it's a pretty solid game, and I wouldn't feel right putting it at C tier, even though I am a little bit tempted to do it. Now, Yakuza 2 kind of has the same highs and lows as the first game, but I do like the story a lot more, and admittedly it's snappier than Yakuza 1. The responsiveness is a little bit closer to what I expect from the later games, albeit sidesteps are still pretty weak, and there were times when I think the game just didn't register my inputs, but overall, I definitely prefer playing this over Yakuza 1, which is why even though they're in the same tier, Yakuza 2 is one rank above it. As far as A tier, honestly, just take my previous B tier and place it on A. I was tempted to put Yakuza 3 at B tier because this game kind of has similar issues in terms of the combat feeling monotonous after a certain point, but after careful consideration, I do legitimately see it as a tier above the PS2 games. Honestly, after just playing Yakuza 3 for like 2 minutes, I remember that there was a time when I didn't have to fight my opponents with precognition, inputting triangle while Kiryu is still doing his light attacks way before he's even close to launching his heavy attack. There are of course other improvements such as the 3D open world over fixed camera angles, the city of Kamurocho looking sharper and having greatly improved graphics with the updated CG models. I guess it also helps that I played the remastered version of Yakuza 3 running at 1080p with 60 frames per second, allowing for a smoother experience than what I was having even on an emulator. Plus, the story is pretty great as long as you're able to bypass the first few hours of almost nothing happening. I don't think I have much to explain regarding the rest of A tier, although speaking of Yakuza 4, not so long ago I made a bit of a desperate video about 10 months ago. Basically what happened was I was editing and collecting clips for an upcoming video I was writing at the time. It was probably Majima's involvement in Yakuza 5, and I kept hearing this song I had caught quite a few times while editing a previous video on Aizawa, and it's the same one playing during a few scenes with Kurosawa. But this one was actually first played in Yakuza 4, which I didn't even notice it at first. Now, what was scrambling my brain was the simple fact that this BGM was non-existent no matter where I searched, which is why I even made that 1-minute video asking, guys, do any of you even know what the name of the song even is? Well, here's an update to that video. Yep, you heard it right. I finally found this goddamn song. I'm not gonna tell you how I did it because I feel like I'm already on YouTube's watch list for promoting circumvention of DRM, but I guess the most legal answer I can give to you is this. If you have a copy, official or non-official, of the original PS3 version of Yakuza 5, in theory, if you extract the game folder, it is possible to find this track. What may prove to be a bit difficult is finding programs that recognize the file type because this is not a typical audio file. Thankfully, MPV on Linux can run these file types, although it doesn't seem to work with all of them, so I may need to do a bit more research in case I need to extract future audio samples with other games. Anyway, back on topic, since I made that first tier list video, I did get the chance to play 2 more games, namely Yakuza 7 and Lost Judgment. As far as Yakuza 7, I feel comfortable putting it at S tier. I think its mountain of content, enriched story, and innovative combat system puts it above even the likes of Yakuza 5 and Kiwami 2. It's not the same tier as the gods, which are Yakuza 6 and 0, but it is certainly the best out of the S rankings. Now, as far as Lost Judgment, this one is actually my new favorite game from this studio. Maybe one day I'll go into details on why, but in summary, it's at the top of S+. Additionally, I would like to reorder Judgment to be above Kiwami 2. Not really much to say, I just simply changed my mind. And I think that's all I have to say. I'll record this video when I have the time, and other than that, hope y'all have a good day.